Have you ever wondered what truly hides behind the masks on Halloween? It's a question that presupposes the monsters are fictional, a game of dress-up we all agree to play for one night. But I learned, in the most visceral way possible, that for some, the mask isn't a costume. It's camouflage. The real predators don't wait for an invitation. They simply use the darkness and the noise of the holiday to move among us. Their intentions far more sinister than collecting candy. Their harvest is something else entirely. My education in this bleak reality began with a smell, a peculiar and unsettling cocktail of odors that has haunted my Octobers ever since. It's a mix of damp, old cat fur, the stale tang of cheap beer, and a faint, metallic scent, like a handful of tarnished pennies. That specific aroma is the ghostly prelude to a profound dread, a cold anchor that drags me back to a Halloween when I was 7 or 8, a night that taught me the chilling truth about opening your door to the dark. That year, my mother, usually a vigilant supervisor of our trick-or-treating expeditions, made the fateful decision to drop me off at my friend Sean's house. Sean and his other friend, Johnny, were older, and their world felt thrillingly lawless. Sean's house was a kingdom of chaos, permanently steeped in that metallic, musky cat odor. His older sister, our nominal guardian, was a phantom presence, always preoccupied with a rotating cast of strange, sullen men who loitered in their living room. I was envious of Sean's perceived freedom, a stark contrast to my own structured upbringing. In hindsight, I recognize that what I saw as freedom was merely a vacuum of parental oversight, an open door inviting danger to step inside. It was this absence of authority that allowed Johnny and Sean to declare, with a conspiratorial glint in their eyes, that we would be going out completely unsupervised. A shiver of nervous excitement ran through me, a thrill born from pure, unadulterated defiance of my mother's rules. We armed ourselves with massive pillow sacks, our ambitions as vast and empty as the cotton bags we carried. The initial hours were a jubilant blur of suburban streets, a whirlwind of vibrant costumes, shouted trick-or-treats, and the satisfying rustle of candy filling our sacks. When concerned adults would inquire about our parents, Johnny, ever the smooth operator, would deploy a well-rehearsed lie with effortless charm. They're just up ahead with my sister. It was a simple, effective piece of fiction that worked every time. By 5 o'clock, our sacks were respectably heavy. We retreated to the familiar chaos of Sean's house for a brief intermission. A frantic feast of frozen pizza and the cheapest, most sugary candy from our haul, all consumed under the flickering glow of cheesy Halloween specials on television. Johnny was eventually collected by his parents, but Sean and I were far from satisfied. Our hunger for candy was insatiable. We were determined to embark on a second round, a foray into the deeper, darker part of the evening. Darkness had fully descended when we ventured out again, the clock ticking well past 8. The boisterous energy of the early evening had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, almost watchful stillness. The streets were emptier, the chorus of children's laughter having faded to a few sporadic echoes. We deliberately chose blocks we hadn't yet explored, wandering further and further from the comforting, familiar glow of Sean's Street into a more secluded section of the neighborhood, where houses stood further apart, like silent, sleeping giants. It was on one of these hushed, dimly lit streets that he first entered our periphery. A man several houses behind us, pushing a stroller with a slow, deliberate pace. He was a solitary figure, moving in our direction, and we paid him little mind, assuming him to be a weary father on a final, late-night candy run for his youngest child. But as we continued our door-to-door pilgrimage, we became aware that the distance between us was steadily, unnervingly closing. A soft, rhythmic sound began to reach our ears, carried on the crisp night air. It was a low, tuneless shushing, almost a form of whispered singing, a deeply unsettling lullaby in the profound silence. He eventually drew level with us, his voice, when he spoke, startlingly smooth and cheerful, a stark contrast to the eerie sound he'd been making. "How's the trick-or-treating going, boys?" he asked, his smile a pale slash in the gloom. We mumbled a collective, "Good," our eyes fixed on the shrouded stroller. "It's getting pretty late," he continued, his tone friendly, almost paternal. He gestured up the street. "I'm heading back to my house now. I can give you guys the rest of my candy if you want." Sean and I exchanged a wide-eyed, silent glance. This was the jackpot, the legendary score that trick-or-treaters dream of. Sean, ever the bold one, immediately asked the crucial question, "What kind of candy do you have?" The man's smile seemed to widen. "A bunch of different full-sized bags," he replied, pointing to a small sack that dangled tantalizingly from the stroller's handle. He explained that he hadn't had many visitors, as he had been more focused on taking his daughter out for a quiet stroll. The stroller itself was a source of mystery, its occupant completely obscured by a thick, folding canopy. "She's asleep," the man offered, his gentle smile returning. "Don't want to wake her up. My house is just up this way." Our greed eclipsed our caution. We followed him, the weight of our own heavy sacks seeming to lighten with the anticipation of our impending treasure. His pace quickened now, and I became acutely aware of just how desolate the street had become. As we walked, he peppered us with questions, our names, our schools, where we lived, benign inquiries that felt strangely invasive in the enveloping darkness. Periodically, he would lean into the shrouded stroller, murmuring to his daughter in a strange, high-pitched voice, before turning back to us with that same fixed smile. We arrived at his house, a large, two-story structure set far back from the road, cloaked in an oppressive darkness that swallowed the faint moonlight. He led us up the cracked walkway, unlocked the front door, and carefully pushed the stroller inside first. Then he turned and held the door open for us. A silent, smiling invitation. Sean, ever fearless, stepped inside without hesitation. I followed, but a powerful wave of unease washed over me. The moment I crossed the threshold, it was I who asked, my voice barely a whisper, if we could leave the front door open. For a fleeting moment, the man's smile faltered, a brief flicker of something else in his eyes before it was quickly restored. "Yeah, of course," he said, perhaps a little too quickly. He pushed the stroller into the center of a cavernous, empty living room, about 10 feet from where we stood frozen by the door. "I'll be right back," he announced brightly. "I'll get those candy bags from the kitchen." He disappeared down a dark hallway, leaving us alone in the silent, vacant room. I nudged Sean, my whisper urgent, and laced with a fear I couldn't articulate. Why would he keep the candy so far away from the door? Sean didn't respond. His gaze was locked on the stroller, a dark, silent monolith in the middle of the empty room. Slowly, with a deliberation that felt both brave and reckless, he walked towards it. He reached out a hesitant hand, and with a soft creak, lifted the folding cover. The expression that flooded Sean's face was not one of simple fear or surprise. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion, a deep, primal horror. He slammed the cover back down with a sharp thud, his entire body coiling like a spring. "Let's go," he choked out, the words strangled and raw with terror. He didn't wait for me. He didn't walk. He sprinted, a full tilt, panicked dash back towards the sliver of night visible through the open door. I scrambled after him, my heavy pillow sack a cumbersome anchor, hindering my escape. We burst out of the house and onto the cold sidewalk, gasping for air, just as a woman's voice sliced through the night's silence. "Hey, excuse me." A neighbor was running towards us from the house next door, her face etched with concern. Sean, still high on adrenaline and terror, blurted out the unbelievable truth. He offered us candy, but he was pushing a stroller with a fake baby in it. An icy dread prickled my skin, raising every hair on my arms. The woman's horrified expression was all the confirmation we needed. "That man doesn't have a child," she said, her own voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "I saw you walking up the street with him, and I knew something was wrong." She didn't hesitate, rushing us into the safety of her car and driving us home. One by one, I know now how questionable it was to get into another stranger's car. But in that moment, she was our savior from an unspeakable, unknown fate. The police were called. My parents, in a desperate attempt to shield me from the full gravity of the situation, never disclosed the outcome of the investigation. But the memory was seared into my psyche, a permanent brand of fear. That night, the world had revealed a terrible secret: that the most convincing monsters are not the ones with fangs and claws, but the ones who look like ordinary, weary fathers offering candy on a dark, empty street. The world was cold, watchful, and full of hidden teeth. The years did their work, softening the sharp edges of the memory into a dull, persistent ache of paranoia that flared up every October. By the time I was in college, the fear was a familiar, if unwelcome, companion. One Halloween, which fell on a Monday night, I found myself tasked with the solitary duty of handing out candy. Our house was situated at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a dead end that discouraged all but the most determined trick-or-treaters. I had settled in for a quiet night, making significant progress on my coursework as the hours ticked by. Around 9:30 p.m., long after the last of the neighborhood children had retired, the silence was shattered by the unexpected, jarring sound of the doorbell. My dog, Vito, a diminutive rat terrier with the ferocious bark of a much larger beast, erupted into a frenzy. I cautiously made my way downstairs, peering through the protective glass of the storm door. On the stoop stood a massive figure, a man whose large frame was made even more imposing by a terrifying clown costume. His mask was a grotesque caricature of a smiling face with exaggerated, gruesome features. He was utterly alone, and he held a brown sack that looked conspicuously, unnervingly empty. He raised a gloved hand and waved slowly, then pointed to the sack, an implicit demand for candy. I did not open the storm door. Through the cold glass, I spoke with a clarity I did not feel. "Sorry, we don't have any more candy." I didn't wait for a response. I slammed the main wooden door shut, the sound echoing in the silent house, and immediately twisted the deadbolt. A wave of regret and fear washed over me. Why had I opened the main door at all? He was huge, clearly not a child or even a teenager. The entire interaction felt profoundly wrong, deeply invasive. I lingered by the door, my ear pressed against the wood, listening for the sound of retreating footsteps on the concrete porch. Instead, the silence was broken again, this time by the insistent, chilling chime of the doorbell. Vito began to rage anew at my feet. This was no prank. This was something else. I scooped Vito up, carried his trembling body upstairs with me, and systematically turned off all the downstairs lights. A desperate, futile signal that the house was now closed for the night. I secured Vito in my bedroom and stood at the top of the darkened staircase, straining my ears to hear over the frantic beating of my own heart. And then I heard it, a sharp, violent snap. It was a loud, percussive sound from the front door, the unmistakable noise of the latch on the storm door being forcefully broken from its frame. It was immediately followed by a series of hard, insistent knocks on the main door. He was trying to get in. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. I retreated to the relative safety of my room, my fingers fumbling as I texted my family's group chat, a desperate plea for contact that I knew would likely go unanswered for hours. I tried to distract myself, turning on the television, forcing my eyes to focus on the screen. A pathetic attempt to pretend the nightmare unfolding just downstairs wasn't real. But then the doorbell rang again, a mocking, persistent chime. "Shush, Vito, shush," I whispered, my voice trembling as I pulled the blinds completely shut, plunging the room into darkness. I didn't want that horrific clown to know which room I occupied, which window was mine. I tried calling my brother, who, predictably busy, dismissed my escalating fear as an overreaction to a Halloween prank. I hung up, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise. I must have drifted off, lulled into a false sense of security by the silence and my own exhaustion. I awoke with a start to Vito's low, rumbling growl, a sound I knew he reserved for moments of extreme alertness, a prelude to an attack. I hushed him gently, my own senses on high alert, and followed his intense, fixed gaze. He was staring at the window, his small body rigid with tension. I held my breath and listened. A faint, almost imperceptible sound reached my ears. A subtle, rhythmic thump-thump emanating from right outside the window glass. It sounded like something soft, perhaps a gloved hand, rubbing gently, deliberately against the pane. My bedroom was on the second floor. It was impossible. No one could be at my window. It had to be paranoia, my traumatized mind playing tricks on me. But the sound persisted, a soft, insistent caress from the darkness outside. With a tremor I couldn't control, I crept towards the window. I took a deep breath, and with a single, swift motion, I pushed open the blind. The grotesque, painted face of the clown filled the entire pane of glass. Its dead, black eyes staring directly into mine. It was there. It was real. I screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror that tore from the depths of my soul. The clown simply tilted its enormous, horrific head, a silent, curious gesture. I scrambled away from the window, grabbing my phone as I fled the room, Vito scrambling at my heels. I locked myself in my parents' bedroom, my body shaking so violently I could barely operate the phone. I dialed 911, my voice a choked, incoherent mess, as I tried to explain the impossible horror. The police arrived within 10 agonizing minutes. They searched the property, their powerful flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. They confirmed my story. They found the broken latch on the storm door, a clear sign of forced entry. But the truly chilling discovery, the one that confirmed the depth of the intruder's malicious intent, was leaning against the side of the house, positioned directly beneath my bedroom window. It was my father's large extension ladder, which had been retrieved from our locked storage shed in the backyard. The clown had climbed up to my second-story window to watch me as I slept. I did not stay in the house that night, the feeling of violation too profound. The image of that mask at my window seared into my mind. To this day, the incident remains an unresolved horror, a question mark hanging in the dark. Was it a sick, elaborate prank, or the prelude to something far more sinister? I'll never know, but the feeling of being watched, of being isolated and deliberately targeted, was a terrifying echo of the man with the fake baby. A reinforcement of the lesson that monsters are real, and they are patient. The following year, I was determined to surround myself with people, to avoid the terrifying isolation that Halloween night seemed to promise. It was the Saturday of Halloween, and my friends Kate, Shauna, Tracy, and I were desperate for plans. Every party seemed to be sold out or private. In a moment of impulsive frustration, Kate posted on her social media a wide net cast in search of a house party. To my surprise, she received an almost instantaneous reply. She forwarded the details to our group chat: an address in the next town over, a start time, and a few simple rules. Indoor only, bring your own beverages, and a strangely specific, unsettling requirement to bring at least one girl for every guy. The host was allegedly a mutual acquaintance named Luke, a detail that provided a thin, flimsy veneer of safety. The promise of a party was enough to override our collective apprehension. We gathered at Shauna's house to pregame, the air thick with excitement and a touch of reckless energy. Armed with an assortment of drinks, we called an Uber and were soon pulling up to a large house, its lawn already crowded with cars. The house itself was draped in orange string lights, casting a dim, festive glow that seemed to promise a classic Halloween experience. As we walked through the open front door, the first person to greet us was not a college student, but an older man, perhaps in his 50s. He introduced himself as John, Luke's dad, his welcome a little too enthusiastic, his eyes a little too bright. "Luke is around here somewhere," he said vaguely. When we asked about the host we supposedly knew, John was overly friendly, gravitating towards our group of girls, urging us to deposit our drinks in the giant, ice-filled coolers that dominated the kitchen. There was something unsettling about his presence, an unsettling mixture of forced warmth and a predatory intensity that simmered just beneath the surface. We found an empty beer pong table and started a game, trying to immerse ourselves in the party atmosphere. But John was a constant, orbiting presence. He soon reappeared, shouting our names from across the kitchen. "Shots," he yelled, lining up several glasses of tequila. He insisted we all partake, and I gagged on the harsh, burning liquid. The alcohol was beginning to hit me, and John seemed determined to accelerate the process, constantly asking the girls what their poison was before expertly mixing them potent drinks. Mid-game, he personally handed me a red Solo cup filled with a vodka soda. I tried to sip it slowly, conscious of my rapidly diminishing sobriety. But this drink seemed different. hitting me with a strange, disorienting force. I went to retrieve my phone from an outlet where I'd left it to charge, only to find it hadn't charged at all. The outlet was dead, a small, insignificant detail that felt strangely ominous. I decided to keep my phone on me, a small anchor in a sea of growing confusion. Our guy friends finally arrived, but by then, my world was already tilting on its axis. The clarity of the evening dissolved with shocking speed. One moment, I was standing, engaged in a conversation with our friend Jeff. The next, there was only a profound, suffocating blackness. I woke up slumped in the backseat of a car, parked in my own driveway, my head spinning, my vision a blurry, nauseating mess. I felt profoundly disconnected, not merely drunk, but as if my mind had been severed from my body. One of our friends walked me to my front door, and then they were gone. I stumbled to my room and checked my phone. There was a thread of texts from an unsaved number. The first, sent while I was still at the party, was chilling. John, uh-oh. It was followed by, you look so cute. Then, hours later, after I had presumably been taken home, the messages resumed their menacing crawl across my screen. Where did my favorite girls go? I was horrified, sickened by the realization that I must have been intoxicated enough to give that predator my number. The next morning, the physical sickness was matched by a profound, soul-deep revulsion. As I read the rest of the messages he had sent in the dead of night. Where are you? I'm coming to your house. You left something here. I'm here. Can you come to the door? Hello, are you awake? He had also tried to call 3 times, all around 2 a.m. while I was passed out. He had been outside my house, trying to get to me. I screenshotted the messages and sent them to my friends. That's when the horrifying truth of the previous night spilled out. Kate described how John had been all over me as I became increasingly unresponsive. A zombie, she called it. They had become genuinely frightened by my state and had made the decision to pull me out of there immediately. As they were leaving, they saw 2 police cars arriving, likely for a noise complaint. But the most alarming detail was what our clear-headed friends noticed about the house itself. It was completely empty. There was no furniture, no pictures, no signs of life. It was a vast, vacant space, filled only with strangers, loud music, and beer pong tables. One of our friends looked up the number John had used. It was a voice over IP number, a fake, untraceable line, and with my phone number, he could have easily found my address online. It was Shauna who finally gave voice to the terrifying conclusion we had all been circling. He roofied you. The words landed with a sickening thud of truth. It explained the memory loss, the unique, disconnected wooziness that was so much more profound than simple drunkenness. The vacant house, the fake sun, the aggressive pushing of drinks, the luring rule. It had all been a meticulously planned, calculated trap. We went to the police station, our hands trembling as we recounted the story. When we provided the address, The officer at the desk asked if our report was related to the large party at the vacant house. The previous night, our mouths fell open. Neighbors had been calling for hours about a massive party taking place in a dwelling that had been empty for months, its owners living out of state. We sat with a detective, relating every disturbing detail, from the empty house to the untraceable number and the menacing texts. They promised to investigate, to try and trace the VoIP number, to look into the property records, but nothing ever came of it. We were never called back for an identification. No arrests were ever made. John, the dangerous predator who used Halloween as a cover to lure and drug young women, was still free, a ghost in the system. That is the true haunting horror of Halloween. It is not the specters or the ghouls of folklore, but the very real men who exploit the season's inherent permission for masks, anonymity, and chaos. Every sound, a late doorbell, a phone ringing from an unsaved number, the sharp snap of a latch breaking, is a trigger. A ghostly echo that transports me back to the cold dread of realizing I was being watched through a second-story window, or the icy clarity of knowing I had been systematically lured into a predator's trap. I sometimes still feel a chilling presence late at night, a lingering coldness in the room that carries the faint, phantom scent of old metal and cat fur. I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that I was lucky. I was lucky to escape John's vacant house, just as I was lucky to escape the man with the fake baby and the monstrous clown on the ladder. My stories ended in escape, but the terrifying question is how many others did not. And sometimes, when the wind howls and rattles the window frame just right, I can almost hear it again, that faint, unsettling shush, the soft, tuneless singing of a predator waiting patiently in the darkness for the next harvest night. The truly horrifying realization is that these monsters are not supernatural. They are woven into the fabric of our world, using the camouflage of our celebrations to seek out their next unsupervised victims. And they are still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting person to open the door.